Thank you for reminding me. Okay, all right. Okay. So the batch normalization is basically the thing that we try to address in batch normalization is called internal covariance shift. Okay, and so the name sounds little heavy, but it's actually simple observation. Okay, so what it is? Now you know that in each layer of any neural network, okay, all kinds of neural network, this is applicable to. So it has some inputs, okay, and the inputs, I mean, that's every layer is taking some inputs from the previous layer, okay, and then basically doing some linear combination and then passing it through the activation function and so on and so forth. So the input is taking in every layer, the neural networks, they have a corresponding distribution. Okay, distribution means some kind of how they are the inputs actually distributed. Okay, so something like. So and it generally depends on two things. First of all, the randomness in the parameter initialization. Okay, that means in any neural network, you have to start from somewhere. You have to estimate these parameters and you have to start from somewhere. So we randomly initialize these model parameters. Okay, and then we do gradient updates using gradient descent. Okay, that's what we do. So this distribution, that how this input is going to be received in individual layers, will depend on, of course, the initial parameters, the initializations. That's the one thing. And the second thing, in any real data, which is very prevalent, the randomness in the input data, because any real data, there will be some amount of randomness, random noise, okay, because you cannot expect that all 100% data will be absolutely correct. In real world, that does not happen. Okay, so there are some amount of randomness in the data. Okay, so as a result, these two things basically can dismantle the good distribution. Okay, when you pass the data on to the neural network, so the distribution that you're going to get may not be what you desired for unless you have absolutely clear data and good initialization. Okay, so these things basically, the effect that it has on the internal layers during training is called the internal covariance shift. Okay, so when you are training, okay, that the things that you are getting from the individual layers, internal layers from the neural network, okay, will shift the data distribution a little here and there. This is called internal covariance shift. Okay, so we really want to fix that issue. Okay, so I can take one very simple example. Probably you can correlate that, okay, very easily. So for example, think about you are dealing with 3-4 variables, okay, or 3-4 different kinds of data, and the range of the data do not match. For example, some basically will be between 0 and 1, some will be between 15 to, say, for example, 1000, and things like this. All kinds of stuff can happen. Okay, so if you try to feed this data as is, okay, then basically one particular variable is going to dominate the other because of the range incompatibility, distribution and incompatibility, all kinds of stuff. Okay, so all we really want to do, we want to normalize this whole thing to balance the whole thing, that nobody is going to contribute more than the others and things like that. Okay, so essentially this is a normalization step, and I'm sure that you are familiar with this normalization of data. Like when you have any data, what you do, basically you can compute the mean and variance, mean and standard deviation, and then normalize this whole thing to 0 or 1 and things like that. Okay, so it's called the zero mean, one standard deviation normalization. That's pretty common in any kind of data processing things. Okay, so what we do that normalization. In addition to that, we have some scaling and shift operations. Okay, and I will let you know what it is. So okay, so what we do actually, so every layer is taking some input, and remember that in any modern deep neural network, we train it by batch gradient descent, mini batch gradient descent. Okay, so you don't use all the data at a go, like a single go, and then basically train the network. We do not do that. What we do, we take a batch, we basically apply feed forward pass and then backdrop on the batch, mini batch, and then we try to update the whole thing. Okay, so that is what is called batch normalization. So what we do, you take a batch, okay, and then what you do, you simply compute the input and output through the network, okay, and then for every layer you have some input for that particular batch. Okay, so what you do is basically compute the mean of that inputs for every layer, Then you compute the variance, okay, of that batch for every layer, okay, and then we can simply use these things to normalize the whole thing. And you can see the mean is basically the standard mean, variance also you can know pretty straightforward. Now then we use this information to make a kind of 0-1 distribution. So the mean minus, the actual value minus the mean, okay, divided by the standard deviation or the variance plus epsilon. Okay, that's the standard way to normalize this data. So now here epsilon is basically taken just to smooth this whole thing. That means that in case the sigma becomes 0 or very small, you want to basically address these things. Okay, so mu b, sigma square b, and x cap I is basically the standard thing that we do. Now the additional operation that we do here, scale and shift. Okay, now we do not straight away apply the x cap, we do some kind of linear transformation. So we multiply some factors, here is gamma into x cap I plus another parameter called beta. Okay, so this is called like scale and shift. Okay, just shifting the whole things. Okay, so we do that. Now if you look at this particular expression, mu b you can compute from data. It doesn't involve any parameters. Okay, the unknown parameters. Sigma square b also you can straight away compute from data. X cap also you can compute straight away from data because it depends on sigma and mu. But why I will require, okay, gamma and beta to be known. Unless you know that gamma and beta to be known, you cannot compute yi. Okay, so how you do that? It's very simple. Now because just like the other model parameters that you have to remember the weights and biases in a neural network. Okay, so here also these two parameters gamma and beta, you can simply train it using backpropagation the same way. So you have to basically compute two more expressions in the backpropagation, that's it and nothing else. Okay, you have to compute the del error with respect to gamma and del error with respect to beta. That's the two things, two additional partial derivatives that you have to basically compute. Okay, and you are basically done. Okay, all right. Now, so far so good. So this is basically when you're training your network, you can compute everything together and so on and so forth. You can, for mini batch, you can compute the means, you can compute the standard variance, then you can compute x cap, then you can basically train the value for gamma and beta, you can compute yi, so on and so forth. Okay. So the gamma and beta you will learn by training the network. Okay, that is not an issue. So once the network is trained, it is known to you, so not an issue. Now remember that once you train the network, then that is done, you freeze the network and so on. So you have all the parameters that you had. But now the question is, you have to test this. You have to draw some inference, okay, on the unknown data, the test data, okay, where you do not have the output level, but you know the input features and all, and so you have to test it. Now in test time, you do not have anything called batch. There is no such a thing called batch because test time you are basically going to process one example at a time, right? Because nobody is going to give you the batch because that's basically the purpose. Okay. So what do you do then? If you go back to this previous formula, that while we are doing the batch normalization, we need to have this mu b, sigma square b, x cap, and all kinds of stuff. Okay. But when test time, how can you compute those things? Because you are only dealing with only one variable. Okay, so you have to basically then normalize this whole thing. So what you do, what you assume is that the distribution of the training data and the distribution of the test data more or less same. Okay, this is not a very strong realistic assumption, but you make some assumption because we always expect that distribution will be same. Otherwise, the network will never generalize. So if we assume that what we can do, we have learned these mu b's and sigma square b's from the training data. Okay, and so because we are assuming that the training data and test data will come from the same distribution, then we can straight away apply those things here directly. We don't need to explicitly compute the thing for the test data. We can just take this from the training data and we can simply apply during test time. Okay. And these scaling parameters like the gamma and the beta that is there. So the last expression in this is already trained. So it's basically you have found this by training the network. So that is not an issue. It is known to you. The only thing that mu b and sigma square b You have to fix it for the test time, for the test examples, and that you can do simply by taking these values from the training data itself. Okay, and you simply take the pass, you simply compute the whole thing, and so on. Okay, so that is called batch normalization. Now, I will end up on this particular concept by saying this, that batch normalization has been and is considered as one of the most important kind of trick for training very deep neural network. Okay, it has lots of other benefits. Okay, so for example, it can regularize very well, it can help you fight this distributional changes and so on and so forth. So almost any modern neural networks, be it feed-forward, CNN, RNN, whatever, batch normalization is kind of a de facto choice when you are training it. Okay, so that is how basically we do batch normalization. So any question on this? All right. Okay. So let's now move on to another concept called regularization. Okay, you probably heard of these things. So I will give you some other concept around this in this particular lecture, and then we'll wrap up. So what is regularization? So this is not only relevant for deep learning, for any kind of machine learning. This is important actually. Okay, you probably heard of these things during SBMR elsewhere. So what we really want to do, we really want to improve single model performance. Okay. Now, one way of doing improving performance is like checking the resilience of these models. Is that you can basically apply n-fold cross validation. You have some training data, you can basically create multiple folds. Okay, you train on n-1 fold, test on the nth fold, and you just repeat these things for every fold. Okay, and that's basically you can measure the performance. Now here what we are trying to say is that improving single model performance. Okay, we do not want to like build those kinds of 6, 7, 8 whatever models. Okay, what we really want to do, we want to create only one model and how we can improve the performance of this model. Okay, now if you look at this particular figure, that on the left side you have the training loss, which is gradually coming down with respect to the number of iteration on the x-axis. Okay, and then once you do that, your training data is actually telling that your model is actually doing very good, because once you increase the iteration, you're gradually decreasing your training loss. So that sounds good, all right. But on the right side, for example, once you freeze your trained network, and you simply apply this trained network or trained model on the validation set, your performance is going to drop. And you can see this gap. Okay, your training performance is very good. Okay, but then on the validation set, okay, this is going to be very, very bad. Okay, you can see the gap. So we really want to fight this kind of phenomenon. We want to make this red bar as small as possible. That means the blue line and the orange line, we want to make this as close as possible. That's what we want to do. Okay, and so another trick that we can basically play here is called regularization. So the key idea here is this, that now you know the loss function. Okay, so in a loss function, so in any loss function that you probably remember that we have taken squared loss. We can take this, for example, the logistic loss. Okay, all kinds of stuff, different kinds of loss function that you can play with. Okay, which will tell that how well your model is actually doing. Now, what happens in regularization is that we simply want to add one more term, and that's the purpose. We have the usual loss function, okay, and we simply want to add one more term to the loss function. So let me just formally define the whole thing. So I am just writing down in the way that my new loss function will be, okay, the old loss function plus, okay, an additional term. Say I would call it RW and then one hyperparameter. Okay, So the lambda is basically a hyperparameter. Well, this is the old loss that you had, and this RW is the regularization factor. Okay, and this W is basically nothing but set of parameters. Okay, just a set of parameters. Okay, now RW is naturally a function of those parameters. Now let's take very specific concrete examples and try to see what kinds of things actually we can actually do. Okay, so let me just copy this, paste here. Okay, now what we can do here actually. Okay, so one possible thing could be that, say, I'm just erasing this off. Now I have to define this RW. Now, as I'm mentioning that old loss could be some loss function under loss functions, could be squared loss, it could be something else like logistic loss and so on and so forth. So I'm not really dealing with that one, but I'm basically dealing with this particular part now. Okay. So there are many different kind of regularizations by adding the extra term. So one is called L1 regularization. Okay, so what it is, in that case, the RW will be simply that sum over, okay, say I and J over this W, I and J. Simple like that. Okay, so you have a bunch of model parameters. Okay, set of parameters in this model. So all these parameters I can say is indexed by ij. Okay, so you can think about these things now in the entire model. And so what I will do, I will simply going to take the absolute sum of these parameters. So why is absolute value? Because the parameters value can be negative. Okay, it can be negative. So I'm simply going to basically make it absolute. Only the magnitude, not the sign matters, and then I'm going to add this thing. Okay, and so I'm going to add the whole thing with this particular model. Now that sounds very trivial, but what it is actually achieving in this case, we try to judge the whole thing numerically, what is trying to achieve in this case. Now if you look at this thing, now think about your old concept of model fitness, model goodness, and this and that and so on and so forth. Okay, now we know from our fundamentals that if a machine learning model or statistical model, whatever you call it, has too many parameters compared to the amount of training data that you have, the model can overfit the data. Overfit means it can remember the data. You can use those parameters to remember everything in the data. Okay, so it doesn't really learn the whole thing. Okay, something like, for example, I am giving some example like 2 plus 3 is 5, 3 plus 4 is 7, 7 plus 3 is 10, and I am giving these examples. And basically, I am asking my machine to learn this. So learning means that it can do beyond what is given in the training data. Okay, so for example, if I give say 10 plus 11, how much? If a model can tell it is 21, that means it actually learned the operation from the training data. Okay, but if the model cannot tell 10 plus 11 is 21, okay, because that it didn't find that particular data exactly as is in the training data, and therefore it cannot say something, we then call it didn't actually learn. So the objective is to learn these things, not remembering the whole thing. Okay, if you use too many parameters in any model, okay, then what it will end up doing, it will end up remembering all the training data, okay, and doesn't really learn anything. So essentially you want to punish the models that will have too many parameters. The difficulty is that we never know what is the good amount of parameters in a model. We never know that. And the thing is much more complicated in deep learning in particular, because we never know the how many parameters we will need. Okay, so what we generally do, we take a very complex model, that means with too many parameters, okay, and then try to reduce the whole thing. So here, if you look at this RW, Now, if you look at the expression very carefully, that the RW, so this is a loss function, okay? This is a new loss function, okay? Now the loss function, you want to minimize it. So the it will get minimized only when the old loss will be minimum as well as this expression will be small, okay? And it's kind of balanced. So lambda is basically a balancing parameter that you are doing. How much importance you want to give on this one, okay? Now, say old loss, you have this from the standard like loss functions, but in RW will increase when these whole things will increase, okay? So it will increase when the number of parameters that you have in the model will be very high. It automatically will increase these values RW. Second, if the parameters will have very high magnitude, large magnitude, very large numbers, okay? So very large number means also this model can actually overfit. So in both these cases, RW can be very large. As a result, your loss could be very, very high, and you really want to minimize this whole thing. So you can basically, in a sense, it can punish that. Okay. So that's the basic objective. So lambda here is a hyperparameter, just like the other hyperparameters that you do, and you have to basically, do some kind of cross validation to check it and so on and so forth. I must say lambda is better than 0 actually. You can also take lambda is better than 0, but in this case, the new loss and old loss will be the same. So no regression benefit in this. Okay. Now let's move on to another kind of regularization. Okay. So here, what we are trying to do is a different kind of regularization. Okay. So this is called now we are going to talk about L2 regularization. Regularization. Okay. Slight modification. Just play with this RW, nothing else. In this case, the RW is basically essentially more or less the same thing, but here only what we do, okay, what we do here is this, the Wij whole square, and that's it. Okay. So here what we're trying to do, we are not taking the absolute values of this and that and so on and so forth. We are simply taking the square of the whole thing. Okay, so everything will be positive, of course, because these are real numbers and so on and so forth. And as you can see, it has more or less the same purpose. Okay, if there are too many parameters, RW will increase. If the magnitude of these parameters are basically very large, then it will also increase. And so you can see this effect. Okay. Now let's talk about the third thing. Okay. So third thing that we will talk about, again, just play with this RW. Okay. So third thing that I'm going to talk about is called elastic net.
Sir.
Yes, please.
Why is it that we get 0 values for Wij in many cases in L1 regularization and small values in L2?
Yeah, sorry, can you repeat your question? I couldn't hear the last part.
So for L1 regularization, in many cases we get Wij equal to 0. However, in L2 we get small values and not 0. Could you explain why?
So this is based on your, what kind of model that you are talking about, the loss function that you are taking. You observe this based on some problem on some model, right? So what kind of model is this? The general trend that you're talking about, or you are talking about in a particular example?
Generally.
Well, I'm not very sure whether you can make this a general comment. Okay, so it has some impact and interaction with the loss function that you are taking. So if something will happen if you take the logistic loss, something will happen if you take the squared loss, and so on and so forth. And also the model itself. So if you, for example, take say neural network, your behavior will be something else. If you take, for example, SVM, your behavior will be something else, and so on. So I'm not very sure whether I can make very categorical statement or explanation based on this. Okay, but I will look into it. If I find any categorical statement, anything like that, I will let you know definitely. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. All right. All right. So now that we talk about elastic net, what is the elastic net? The elastic net is basically, it is just combination of these two. So in this case, the RW is actually this L1 plus L2. Just a combination of these two factors. Okay. So this is basically the elastic net behavior. Okay. So these are basically playing with. This is one type of regularization where you want to regularize your model by adding an extra term with the loss function. Okay. All right. Now let's look at another thing, and I believe most of you have heard of these things. It's kind of de facto module in any deep neural network. I'm sure you already have used these things, in a neural network, in a neural sessions and all. So this is called dropout. Okay. So it was, I think it was invented 6-7 years ago approximately by the same group like Jeff Hinton and all. Okay. So it is, the purpose again is to regularize the whole thing. Okay. So what do you do? Now remember that a network can have poor regularization, okay, when it is very complex. That complex in the sense that, so when you talk about model complexity, it is not that the model is complex to understand. Okay, that is not the case we basically refer to. We refer to the case where the model has too many parameters actually, and then basically we call it the complex model. Okay, so it's difficult to understand what is going on. All right. So typically what we do in modern deep networks, we typically take a very large network with lots of parameters. Okay, then we train it. Then we basically try to prune, try to compress to make it smaller and things like that we do. Okay, so very similar kind of thing we do here. So here the key idea is this, that you take a very big network, something that you see on the left hand side, and during training you randomly drop some neurons. Okay, you basically run this random number generator, the probability values from your Python library. Okay, and then you randomly drop some neurons. Okay, and so what is the probability of dropping a particular neuron? This is a hyperparameter. So for example, 0.3 you can say, definitely not more than 0.5. Okay, 0.5 means most of the neurons here are going to drop out. Okay, so you can, with some probability, you are going to drop out. So what happens on the right side, you can see that, so if you basically you are doing multiple iteration of training and so on and so forth, so every time you are doing that, okay, you are basically dropping some neurons here and there depending upon the probability value and so on. And so you ended up getting something like this. You completely dropping some neurons and so on and so forth. Okay, and ultimately you retain some of the neurons in this network. So the neurons which will ultimately survive in the network, they have the highest influence, okay, on the network. And the idea is that they are the most important neurons. Okay, so weights of these neurons will be much higher than the other neurons. They are contributing more. Okay, so that's the basic purpose. So the question is, that is all right. During training, you can basically run produce a random number generator. Okay, from your Python library, you can say check whether your random number generator is less than 0.3 or something like that, and you basically drop some neurons and get it all right. So you in this way you can train your network and so on. Ultimately, you retain some of the neurons and so on and so forth. Now, what happens during test time? Okay. Now that, so recall that, say you are dropping some neurons sometimes. Okay, for example, at very fast iteration you are dropping something. Okay, some neurons you are dropping maybe say after 100th iteration and so on and so forth. Okay, so things like that you are basically doing. So if you drop a particular neuron, okay, at some point of time later in this iteration, then that neuron will have much higher impact than the other neurons. Okay, because the weight is basically changed a lot and so on and so forth. Okay, so at test time, then what we should do? Should we completely discard all the neurons that we dropped out? That would be a very bad idea, because maybe some neurons have been dropped out after 100th iteration. So till 99th iteration, it contributed to the model. But should you then drop it out entirely? Okay. So the question is no. You shouldn't do that. So what we do then, basically, say for example, this is a kind of thing. Say one neuron is X that you have here, another neuron is Y. Okay, and this weights that you basically trained after training W1 and W2. So what would the activation value of this one? So remember that this neuron will have some probability of retention, or which is 1 minus the dropout probability, and this neuron also have the same thing. So what we do basically, we can actually do this kind of things. So P into W1 plus P into W2. Okay, so instead of completely discarding the whole thing, so during inference, the weight is basically, so in a standard setup, what will happen? In a standard setup, what you can do? So W, so this is this. So this is, say, W1 into X plus W2 into Y plus the bias of this network, whatever that you can take. Okay, so bias, something like this. This is the standard setup. Okay, without any dropout. Okay, but in this case, remember that we are actually multiplying with this probability P, because basically, you set some retention probability when you basically, you train your network. So the contribution will, of course, will depend on that particular probability value also, because it is not contributing entirely, some part of it, because it was able to survive with some probability. So you simply is kind of, you are down weighting the whole thing. Okay, you just multiply the whole thing, and then you can compute the activation and so on and so forth. Okay, so that is how you can basically then drop out. All right.
Sir?
Yes.
Sir, here the two P's may not need to be same.
That's a good question. So ideally, okay, so you are saying that, say, neuron which has been dropped out at 100 iteration could have different weight than which has been dropped out the very first iteration. That's what you're talking about, right?
No, sir, like there are two neurons, like X and Y, sir. So their probability of like dropping is like using them is P, both of them. So
Right.
I'm saying that if can they have different probabilities like P and Q for X and Y?
So ideally it should do, okay, in fact, because like, that is the case, but for simplification, people actually do these things because of computational simplicity. I tell you why. One is computational simplicity. You don't have to remember everything, separate probability for all the neurons and so on and so forth. You can basically do that things. The other thing which is implicit in that, so W1 and W2. If you look at these two weights, W1 and W2. So if a particular neuron has not been dropped out, or dropped out, like, say you are training your network, say for a 10,000 iteration. Now one particular neuron you dropped out, say at 9,999 iteration. Okay, so before that, that particular neuron contributed to this prediction heavily. So as a result, the weight of that particular neuron has good contribution. Okay, so it changes a lot and so on and so forth. So therefore, the thing is very basically how important that particular weight is implicit in this particular network. So you simply therefore multiply P with that particular weight. Okay.
Okay, sir.
All right. Okay.
Sir, P is the probability of that neuron surviving, right?
Yeah, exactly. Retention. Yes, that's correct. It is not the probability of dropout. You are right. So generally, the belief is that, or not the belief, I would say, general trend is that P should be, so the retention probability should be higher than the dropout probability. Usually 0.7, 0.8 or something like this. So I mean, this in a not sort of, intuitively what you can see when you see P is equals to 0.8, that means in the whole training that you are basically retaining 80% of the neurons. Okay, and reducing 20%, something like approximately that is going to happen. Okay, this is a little tricky. just take a look, think about it. If you have any doubt, any question, you can either ask me tomorrow. That would you would be in better position to kind of understand the whole thing, or maybe you can shoot any kind of question. I'll try to clarify. But keep some thoughts on it. Okay, this is a little tricky. You may not get all the idea, but just take a look and then let me know. Okay. So now another kind of regularization that we do. Okay, it's called data augmentation. Okay, so what it is, now I must tell you this one, that there is a very popular lecture in YouTube given by none other than the inventor of the CNN and all, Geoffrey Hinton. So where he said, what is wrong with CNN? Okay, now the impression that is given is that CNN is something like a super powerful model that can do all kinds of problems, solve all kinds of problems, and so on and so forth. That is not the case in reality. So when you do some real experiments, you get to know there are lots of limitations. Okay, of CNN. So one of the limitations is that the CNN models are actually good. Okay, in predicting the test sample, which will have similar samples in the training set itself. Okay. For example, if a cat, you can see this in this particular picture. Okay, if the cat is in this particular position, okay, and this is in your training data, then the model will do very well on the test data, which will have the similar kind of things, orientation, shape, color, and things like that. But if any of these things actually change, then your CNN model is going to do poorly. Okay, so the question therefore is, how can you augment our training data to incorporate most possible variants that we can have? For example, if you take for example, in cat, for instance, okay, cat is one kind of examples that I have in my training data. So how can we basically do data augmentation in training data so that my labels will be cat, but the picture will be slightly different from what we see in this particular example. Okay, so what do you do in a typical CNN model? That you load the image, you apply some CNN model, and then compute loss, backpropagate, and then try to adjust your model parameters. That's what we do. So let's see that how we can do data augmentation on this particular example. For example, cat. So one possible example in this case is called image transformation. Okay. So on the left side you can see the original cat. Okay. That's you have in the original your training data. Now on the right side, what you can see is another cat. Okay, but this I have created to train my network. Okay, which I have created because it is a cat, but it's a different kind of orientation. Okay, position is different slightly. So you can achieve this goal by transforming a particular image. Image transformation is very easy actually. Using standard library, you can do it. So you transform it, and then you are going to get another kind of image, which is cat. So even though explicitly you do not have your training data like this, the right one in your training data, you can still do this kind of things to augment your data. Okay, that's the one kind of data augmentation. The second kind of augmentation that people often do is called random crops and scales. Okay, for example, for some models, for a particular test example. Say for example, the test example will have this only the head and the eye and the ears of a cat and not the whole body. Okay, and I just simply give it to my CNN model or some neural network model. What my neural network should do? Okay, it should actually say that this is a cat. Okay, but often it doesn't do that. Okay, it depends on whether you have only that particular portion in your training data or not. If you have all the training data with the whole cat, okay, then when a test data will have only the head and the ears and the eyes, your neural network model is not going to predict that correctly. That's the problematic thing. So therefore, what you can do random crops and scales. Okay, you can randomly crop some portion from the image, like just taking some patches, random patches. Okay, some rectangular blocks, you take it, and then you basically say, okay, this is cat, this is cat, this is cat, and so on and so forth. Okay, and then basically augment your data and so on. Okay, now the other possible augmentation that people can do is called the color changes. Okay, so in color changes, what we do, we can actually randomize contrast and brightness. Okay, contrast and brightness. So you can change the contrast of this particular data. The shape, the object, everything remains the same, but you are simply playing with the color and the brightness. Okay, something like that. So you can basically increase the color, you can make it grayscale, okay, you can increase the light and so on and so forth. So these things can be achieved by like very simple image processing libraries. Okay, and you can simply do these things and say all these things are basically cat. Okay, so this is some of the possible approach through which you can do data augmentation. So objective is to represent your training set with as much variability as possible so that you do not miss out something. Okay, because whatever people say, okay, whatever hype or whatever that people say about deep learning still are nothing but a regression model, very big regression model, and it hugely depends on the data. If something is not there in your data, training data, deep learning model is not going to do anything good. So the data has to be rich. And if you have the explicit data in your training set, you are good, no problem. If you do not have that, you can basically augment these things using some kind of strategy like this. Okay. So I see I have 2 minutes left. I will stop here, and then tomorrow I will start about convolutional neural network. Okay, I think one of the most important neural network things, and how you can basically build CNN from scratch on image and videos and things like that, and some of the applications. So, any question? Okay, all right. So then see you tomorrow morning.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.